Okay, I hope that actually means it's recording. Okay, all right, perfect. Well, hello everyone. My name is Amy Bowie, I'm one of the subject librarians at JPL, or virtually now, but for UTSA Libraries. And thank you for coming to our event today for Pride Month. We are with Melissa Gohlke today. She is our LGBTQ historian and archivist. And in a second, I'll let Melissa introduce herself and tell you all the other important things you need to know, but just like a little bit of housekeeping to start with. I have everybody muted right now, but feel free to type in the chat box if you have any comments you want to make throughout the presentation, or if you have any questions. Joaquin Herrera right here, our colleague, is going to help moderate the chat with me. So we're going to gather up your questions and like we can ask Melissa those at the end. But if you do, Melissa has told me that if you do have like a burning question that you want to ask, like as she's presenting, like feel free to raise your hand or something, and I'll let her know. And also, before we start, like I'm going to link in a second to our special collections librarian Steph Knowles' research guide that she created for queer zines. And it's just like the queer zines that we have in our vault right now, which we have a sizable collection. So I'm just going to link it to you so you can check it out after this presentation's over. And with that, Melissa, I'll just hand it over to you right now, and you can just go ahead whenever you want.
Okay. So today I'm going to be presenting on the history of Pride celebrations in San Antonio. We've had a very rich history, and perhaps a lot of folks aren't aware of the background of Pride and what the impetus for Pride was. So we'll be looking at that today. Who I am and what I do. My name is Melissa Gohlke. Thank you for introducing me, Amy. I am trained as an urban historian, and I specialize in local LGBTQ history. I'm also the assistant archivist at UTSA Special Collections. And although I deal with all of the collections, manuscripts in our care and university archives, I do focus on liaising with the LGBTQ community and doing outreach to get the word out that we are a home for historical materials and for queer collections. Just a brief word about terminology. I use different terms when I'm presenting. LGBTQ is the most used term. There are more extensive acronyms. I use the term queer a lot. It serves as a really good umbrella term for anyone on the gender sexual spectrum. It's just more inclusive. Plus the fact that it's really hard to say LGBTQ over and over again. I get a little tongue twisted, so. Today we'll look at the history of Pride in San Antonio. I want to start off with explaining the origins of Pride, the celebration, and how that came about through an exploration of Stonewall. And then we'll look at San Antonio's Stonewall, the early days of Pride in the city, and the 90s, where out is in was the tag for the 1990s. And then we'll look at contemporary celebrations, Pride Bigger Than Texas. The origins of Pride encompass how queers were oppressed and what that meant to the formation of Pride celebrations in the wake of that oppression. We'll briefly talk about the Stonewall Riots and then Christopher Street Liberation Day, which was the first Pride March in the country. Prior to being able to be out and open and come together publicly, it just was not possible in most locations. This is a photograph from the early 1960s of a little hole-in-the-wall place called Mary Ellen's Top Hat. It was a small bar located on the east side of San Antonio, and it was a very popular queer hangout. But as you can see, it's a very tiny space. It's in a peripheral part of the city over on East Commerce across from a cemetery complex. So it's in a semi-derelict part of the city. This is an image of two women sitting on this fabulous car out front of a bar called the Acme Bar. It was on Austin Street, which is a little stretch of street just north of downtown San Antonio. A lot of the buildings have been demolished, including the Acme, but some of the structures that were in the area are still standing and now being refurbished and repurposed for galleries. And I think there's a brewery over there, but it's still a pretty derelict area. It's a space where the railroad used to come through. And then when the railroad moved, it just really declined. But the importance of that was it was a safe space for gay men and women to gather. The Acme was incredibly popular, and it was a little bit north of downtown. So it's generally off the radar of MPs and local police. And I'll talk a little bit about policing queer space later. These folks are celebrating inside a place called Paul's Grove, which was way out toward Helotes, for individuals who still didn't feel quite secure in gathering near the city or within the city limits. There were other options. They could go out to Paul's Grove in the country and be very open and relatively unimpeded in their celebrations. We're fortunate in that these photographs were taken by the gal in the picture. Carolyn Weathers took photographs of all the gay bars she went to. And that's really unusual that the owners allowed her to do that, but she's really provided an excellent historical record for us to explore these places. This is a picture of the interior of the Acme Bar on Austin Street. And as you can see in the foreground, there are two women just ducking down because they didn't want to have their picture taken. That was part of the oppressive atmosphere outside of safe spaces, but even within, there was a fear of discovery. Then comes Stonewall. On June 28th, 1969, this is perhaps the most iconic picture of the Stonewall Riots. I wanted to make sure that I explained Stonewall. I did a presentation several years ago and referred to it, and I found out that not everyone knows the history of Stonewall and why it's important to queer communities across the country and abroad as well. Stonewall was very much representative of the oppression that gay men and women and trans individuals experienced in cities and towns throughout the nation. The Stonewall Inn was located in Greenwich Village in New York City. It was a very small bar, and it served as a haven for queer patrons, someplace where they could go, they could actually get a drink when that was legal. I believe it became legal in the maybe 1966. Prior to that, it was illegal to serve drinks to homosexuals. The mafia ran the Stonewall Inn, and they paid off the local police to leave the establishment alone. But for whatever reason, that changed on June 28th, 1969. The police attempted to raid this bar, and patrons fought back. They fought back against the police, and the incident ignited a series of riots that continued for days. Many scholars of queer history believe that the Stonewall Riots were the underpinning for the gay rights movement. A year after the Stonewall Riots, marchers took to the streets in New York City on Christopher Street, which is where the riots had occurred. They called it the Christopher Street Liberation Day March. It was June 28th, 1970. This would become the first Pride Parade where LGBT folks got out in public and celebrated their liberation, and they wanted to do so publicly. Pride has become an annual marker of remembrance that the first Pride March was really a riot, and hence we have Pride every year. These are two trans women who were absolutely instrumental in moving forward gay liberation and gay rights. I'll read the quotes from them. "No pride for some of us without liberation for all of us." It was a statement by Martha P. Johnson. She was a transgender activist in New York City. And Sylvia Rivera, who worked with her, said, "We have to be visible. We can't be ashamed of who we are." They were very out as trans women and probably the forebearers of the trans movement. This was taking place in the late 60s and early 70s, way before there was a lot of discourse and discussion about what it was to be transgender. We're going to move on to San Antonio's Stonewall. We'll look at the largest gay disco in the city, the San Antonio Country, and within that space, the military and the gays clash. And then I'll talk about policing of queer space and how that affects the community. This is a photograph of the San Antonio Country. So it was a pretty inauspicious building. Used to be a German restaurant, was down on St. Mary's, and the restaurant and bar actually faced the river. So it was a really great place for folks to come together and enjoy the river and to socialize. From what I've heard from people that I've talked to, it was incredibly spacious, really a modern presentation compared to the dark, secretive places that were so emblematic of the decades preceding the 70s. One of the chaps that I talked to, Gene Elder, who we unfortunately lost a couple of years ago, he managed the San Antonio Country, and he remarked that it was a cultural cross-section. It was something new in itself and as eclectic as the building that housed the bar. He said it reminded him of one big moving collage, changing and evolving as the year of 1973 moved on. So it opened in 1973. This is a shot of the interior of the country. You can see it's, for that era, would have been very modern, having couches, the intimate spaces where same-sex couples could hold hands, they could kiss. It was certainly a level of freedom that was not previously accepted. And there was dancing, there were numerous dance floors. And prior to the 70s, that was just not acceptable for same-sex couples to be dancing, and they could be arrested. But the San Antonio Country was so popular, it drew in not just gays, straights would come in, women with their hairdressers, and anyone who had a very liberated sense of mind was welcome in the in the San Antonio country. One of the chaps that I interviewed years ago, a gay man, said this was the first, when he walked through the door of the country, it was the first time he realized that he was not alone, that there were men holding hands, sitting on couches, and he felt that he had finally found his people. He ended up finding his soulmate there, and they were married 37 years later and are still together. So this particular bar really holds iconic status for a lot of people in this city. As popular as the country was, it drew in a lot of patrons, it also got some unwanted attention. The San Antonio police and the military police decided right prior to Christmas that they were going to raid the bar. And they proceeded to start hauling patrons out of the bar and throwing them into paddy wagons. They honed in on a young man who had a very short haircut. The military police went after him and were roughing him up in the parking lot, which drew a lot of attention. So the patrons they didn't fight back when they got arrested, like the folks did at Stonewall. What they did do is fight back in the courts. Hap Beltman, who was a very prominent business entrepreneur in San Antonio and just happened to be a gay man and an attorney, he owned the San Antonio country. And after the altercation with the police, the military moved to put the establishment on the off-limits list. That was problematic for a couple of reasons. It would cut very important revenue streams from military personnel coming into the bar. So they would see the San Antonio country on the off-limits list, which would be posted in the barracks and outside the bar itself. And it was also just not good for business because you would have MPs, local police constantly coming into your establishment and checking for military personnel. So it was very disruptive. So Hap went before a military hearing and presented his case and ended up winning. From what I understand, it was the first case of its kind, possibly in the US. So it was a really big victory for San Antonio's queer community to push back against the police through legal avenues. I threw these pictures in here. This was Gene Elder's response to the raid on the bar. He was a very theatrical person, and he decided that he would write a camp ballet about what happened at the San Antonio country. And he wrote a ballet called Fairy Fiasco, and it was about the importance of being liberated, and all these fairies and queens were performing along the river, and just, it was about freedom and the freedom to be who you were. If any of y'all went to the Trans San Antonio exhibit, we had the beautiful original of this hanging in our gallery. Let's take a look at the early days of Pride, which starts off, of course, very small in the 1970s, and then we'll take a look at the 80s. On June 1976, San Antonio had its first Gay Pride March. The marchers secured a parade permit and had 2 police officers as escorts, and 35 people showed up, and they marched through downtown San Antonio. So it was a really small, but I believe a significant move in having the first gay pride parade in the city. The following year, there were 50 people who attended, and they marched through downtown, and the march culminated with a rally on the steps of City Hall. So they really got more press, were more visible. That year, gay activists began a journey to secure a non-discrimination ordinance, which is something that would not happen until 2015. The article from The Light that is shown here mentions the battle between gays and Anita Bryant, who some of you may be familiar with. She was known as the Orange Juice Queen. And she was very anti-gay. She had concocted this campaign to save our children. She was convinced that because homosexuals could not reproduce themselves, they were going to steal people's children. And she took this message, as absurd as it seems now, across the country, and she was very successful. She came to San Antonio, and there were protests from the gay community against her being in the city. She gave a speech at Cornerstone Church, which is a big evangelical church. During the 70s and into the 80s, Pride is an annual event. And by 1982, as this issue of the calendar, which was one of our local queer publications, states, the Pride celebration was attended by 300 party revelers. So it had grown significantly from its inception in 1976. Pride activities were advertised on the radio. They were advertised on TV and also on the pages of local papers. The San Antonio Gay Alliance called a press conference to alert the media to the details of the city's Pride festivities. So there was really a push to get information out there and to bring folks together. The first Pride picnic was in Lions Park in Pecan Valley. And then the following year, the Pride picnic moved to San Pedro Park, which served as the home for the picnic for many years. Why is that slide blank? There we go. Local publications, gay publications, of which there were many, would advertise the different events that were coming up. So people in the LGBTQ community could stay informed and know what events to attend. And it was good to have a conduit of information. So as events became more popular, folks knew where to go. It branched out from the parade and the picnic to drag shows and a lot of fundraisers, which was really critical during the 1980s and the AIDS epidemic. The theme for Pride in the 90s was Out is In. And we go from having 35 attendees to thousands of attendees at Pride festivities. And then this interesting thing happens where there's a fissure, a fracture within the community, which affects the Pride celebration. This is an ad from, or rather an article from the San Antonio Express News. And I quoted Rhonda Chase, who was at the time co-chair for the Gay Pride celebration, and it's not often we can walk out in public and show affection for each other. So this was the one time of year where gays and lesbians felt safe enough to go out in the community in a very public space and not be afraid to display their affection publicly and just really enjoy themselves. So the picture here shows Alamo City Men's Choral and a lesbian and her daughter. It was just a really nice gathering in San Pedro Park, where you had this microcosm of queer life where people could come together and just really enjoy themselves and be out. We have a t-shirt from the event, which is really awesome. Out is in. Out is in will be the biggest and best Pride picnic ever, with more booths, more entertainment, and more lesbian women and gay men than ever before. That was a statement in Out in San Antonio, which was the queer publication at the time. Our t-shirts, by the way, have all been photographed, and they're part of an international database called Wearing Gay History. And the chap that started it, Eric and Zaba, contacted us to see if we'd like to contribute photos. He has gone around the world, including to South Africa, photographing gay t-shirts. It's a fantastic resource. I'll have to add that to the resources. So as you can see, Pride really grows bigger and bigger every year. I believe this is from 1994. It's in San Pedro Park. You could tell from the fashion, it's definitely the 90s. Dance, I love the dance pictures. I think it's so great to see two guys dancing together, everybody having a good time, just really enjoying themselves. I know when I had been to Pride festivals in the past, it really is just a shared sense of community and jubilation of being out there with folks like you and allies as well. Just wanted to share some of these really great pictures. That one, so special. Love the dance outfits. These are all part of the Marquee photograph collection, which was loaned to us by Ted Switzer, who was the editor of the Marquee. It was a local publication during the 1990s. So he loaned us we had hundreds of photographs, and I love sharing them with folks. It really gives you just sort of this glimpse into a portal of the past of gay life in the 1990s, and folks really having a good time. I'm not sure what kind of line dance this was, but obviously they seem to be enjoying it. I'm going to talk just a little bit about, just briefly, how the community fractures just temporarily and what the reasons for that were. But it was the divisions became very hostile, and with each side really squaring off against the other. So we have the Unity Foundation versus the San Antonio Lesbian Gay Association, or SALGA. There was a dispute about how funds had been handled at previous Pride picnics, and which were run by SALGA. So they were, there was a meeting, a community meeting that was very caustic, and a lot of both sides lobbing accusations at the other. And at this point, because of the dissension, the two groups decided to plan separate picnics, which was kind of weird for the community. Oops. Sorry, folks, lost my place. This occurred in 1997. So you have one Pride picnic that is continuing at San Pedro Park, which is, I want to say the Unity Foundation runs that one. One of the folks in the community made a comment that it really was a shame to have two picnics. That their statement was, we have enough hassles from the rest of the world without being able to unite on the one day of the year we can be ourselves. And I think there were a lot of folks that felt that way. This is an article on the Pride picnic at San Pedro Park, which was on June 14th. They had Cheer Dallas, which is a gay cheer group. And it gives a little backstory on why we celebrate Pride. Oops. And then the San Antonio Lesbian and Gay Association had their Pride picnic, also claiming 15 years of Pride. Their picnic was at the Sunken Garden. So you had, I guess you could look at the bright side. You had two Pride picnics you could go to, but it was really an unfortunate incident that still there's some hurt feelings to this day, which is quite remarkable all this time later that folks that were deeply involved in this are really sensitive and don't care to talk about it. Go in there. The following year, it looked like things were getting a little bit better. There was a big parade through downtown San Antonio, lots of floats. There's Cheer Dallas in action. So it was, I think, the start of some healing. Like I said, there's still some hurt feelings, but at least the community was able to come together in one celebration and have a really good time. Today's Pride celebrations are Pride Bigger Than Texas. The tradition continues, although last year and this year it's virtual, which is, I was hoping it would go back to being an in-person celebration, but I guess we're going to have to wait one more year for that. And lastly, I just wanted to talk about the importance of our archives and what it means to the community. I was really fortunate during Pride Month to do a lot of interviews, which I see as an opportunity not to get myself out there. I'm not someone who craves public attention, but I'm really passionate about collecting. And I feel a mission to get the word out there that collecting LGBTQ materials is really important. And we keep them in perpetuity so that researchers, scholars, students, and even community members can access the archives and write about that history and remember that history. And it's something that an opportunity like this to have it published in the Current really reinforces that. And the Current being a widely read publication gets that word out to folks that we are here and these materials are accessible. And it's also a place where people can donate their collections. So I just wanted to end on that note, and I'll be happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Melissa, quickly, can you share with people, I'm gonna put a link in the chat, but where, I know we have tons of archival material on the website, on our digital site. Can you talk a little bit about what's on there and what people can see if they go to this link here that I'm about to share?
Yes, we do have a digital portal. I would say about 80% of our LGBTQ collections have been digitized. So you can go into our homepage and search by subject. We have a tab for LGBTQ communities with the links to our different collections. You can click on those links and it'll take you to the online guide, and you can access the digital materials there. We digitized several hundred local LGBTQ publications back in 2012 in collaboration with the Happy Foundation. And those are all available online. It's a super resource for researchers. I had someone contact me this week who was looking for, wondering if we had materials in our collection about entrapment operations in public restrooms. And in fact, yes, we have a collection for that. And it's digitized. So I was able to send him the link. He's writing a book about the history of public restrooms. Who'd have thunk it? But it's a fascinating chapter in that story, is how homosexuals have used public spaces to have sexual encounters. And that certainly was true in San Antonio, going quite a ways back. And during the late 90s and 2000s, there were sting operations going on in the parks. And two gay community members fought back against it. So we have all the documentation from all their correspondence. We have hundreds of arrest records. We did not put those online, but those can be accessed. There's part of the public record, but they have personal information. So it's a sensitive thing about putting something like that online. Patrons can come in and do research, however, with the collection.
Great. I think that there's great information there, and I thank you so much for sharing. We have a couple of chats, and if it's okay, Amy, I'll just jump in here and start asking some of these chat questions. Dan wants to know, is there a reason why queer folks weren't allowed to be served alcohol? Do you have any insight on that?
It was just part of the oppression of homosexuals. I mean, there was no same-sex dancing. You couldn't serve alcohol in bars. It was just part of this anti-homosexual rules. So fortunately, over time, activists chipped away at those. But in many states, it was, until just a couple of decades ago, it was illegal to be a homosexual. And if you were caught having relations, there was a very famous Texas case, you were arrested. So just being openly homosexual prior to the 70s, but even in the early 70s, and depending on where you lived, you were at constant risk of being arrested and certainly harmed as well. There are many unfortunate records of men and women, homosexual men and women, being killed for who they were.
I can imagine that was 50, 40 years ago that has happened. It's just amazing to think about how it was just right around the corner when that was.
And even more recently, up through the 90s. So there's still, I think, a sense that as a gay person, you still have a sense that you're at risk sometimes.
Yeah, for sure.
So you find ways to navigate that.
Mhm.
You know, we're fortunate in that we work in a really liberal environment that's really supportive of LGBTQ studies and talking about these issues and being supportive of having me publicly discuss these, you know, our collections. So we are indeed very fortunate.
Yeah, and that's just here in this country. I mean, there's still problems worldwide where, you know, these things still happen. We have
Yes.
a question from Morgan. She asks, what is the timeline of pride flags being included in pride celebrations, either in San Antonio or nationally? You know?
I do. I want to say, I don't know that it was at the first Pride March, but there, if you go online and Google the history of the Pride flag, it was designed by a chap, I want to say in California. And he never realized when he came up with the flag, it had a couple more colors that got pared down over the years. He never had any idea how ubiquitous that symbol would become and how important his creation became to the queer nation and folks around the world. So it's been adopted as this, our symbol is the pride flag and the rainbow.
And even that has evolved over time too. Now we're adding colors to be more inclusive and so it's interesting.
Exactly. Which is as it should be. It should be a very fluid thing because, as we know, there are just many different ways of being, and we want to be as inclusive as we possibly can.
Steph has an interesting question, kind of working off of that question. Have you seen any cool San Antonio specific pride flags, Melissa?
Oh, that's a good question, Steph. I have to do some research. I've seen symbols for different pride organizations, but I don't know that I've seen them on flags. I have to get back to you on that one. I don't know. I do love when I drive down Main Street, even though Main Street has changed so much, unfortunately. I get nostalgic for the old days, but it's lovely to see all the pride flags flying. Just brings joy to my heart. One of my favorite remembrances of being in San Francisco is going into the Castro, and there's a pride flag that is so huge that you see as you come up over the top of the hill. It's fantastic, but it's nice that we live in a city that is inclusive and embraces diversity and has accepted the LGBTQ population. We have a lot of queer organizations that work on the behalf of the community and do fundraising. So we're in a really good place to be gay and allied.
Yeah, that Steph adds in the chat that she just helped a buddy, or they just helped a buddy put up her Texas Pride flag this weekend. And so that's one iteration we've seen is where, you know, different states kind of adopt the Pride flag into their own state or other flags. So that's interesting kind of take on it. That's all the questions we have in the chat, but if anybody else has any other questions, feel free to unmute yourself or speak up. I know this has been very informative, and I always enjoy kind of hearing about how in San Antonio Pride has grown. Even in the 20 years that I've been here, like I remember Travis Park being so like, you know, a small little intimate party, and now it's so huge. And you know, with the crosswalk now has the Pride flag painted onto the sides of it. It's so great to see it grow so much. I just saw Tim's hand go up. Tim, you want to ask your question? Go ahead.
Yeah, so you talked a lot about San Antonio specific specific organizations, but I was wondering, were there San Antonio chapters of larger national organizations such as like the Mattachine Society here in San Antonio?
I have not encountered in my research, a San Antonio chapter of Mattachine, or the Daughters of Bilitis. So not something that I've come across yet. I'm continuously researching, so I'm always discovering new and interesting things and surprising things.
Looks like Vian has a question next. Go ahead, Vian.
Hey, hi. I had a question. I know, right? So Judge Rosie Gonzalez, right?
Mhm.
One of our first openly gay judges has, and I was wondering, are you guys creating an archive for her, or are thinking about it, like collecting all her work and all her activism that she's done for children, and like for the children's court and Bear County's children's court and stuff like that?
We are definitely always have folks on our radar to bring in collections like that. We have the papers of Elena Guajardo, who was the first openly gay person on city council. So yeah, it's a matter of us reaching out to folks, and sometimes we're contacted by individuals who would like to donate their papers. But yeah, that's certainly someone who would be a person of great interest, because she really has been a trailblazer.
Great. Any other questions? If no one else has another question, if you do, just raise your hand. But I'm curious, Melissa, if you can tell us a little bit about how UTSA Library started collecting LGBTQ publications and other ephemera. Like, how did that start, and how did your involvement start with collecting?
It's an interesting story. When I came on board, which was 12 years ago, I think we had maybe 7 small collections. The first one we got was from Linda and Cynthia Phillips. They're transgender activists. Cynthia is still living, a very dear friend, just a wealth of information. And we also were donated the Woman's Space publication. It was the longest running women's publication in San Antonio. It ran from 1986 through 2007, I want to say. So we have those, but these donations came into, we had the department was called the, what is it? For study of women and gender. I don't know why I can't think of the exact name. So they were instrumental in getting those collections in and sort of laid the groundwork. But it just was stagnant for several years. And when I came on board, we had a dean who was had to be convinced that this needed to become a collecting focus. So we were able to bring in some professional professors who were really on board with this, and they talked to the dean and convinced her that it was the right thing to do. And these were tenured professors who had been around since the beginning of UTSA. So they really had a lot of clout and credibility. And if they were telling our dean that this is something we need to move forward with and do so in a big way, she finally said yes. So then we took off. It's been slow going to grow our collections. We have medium, small collections. We're getting a new collection next week. I'm very excited about it. It's HRC and one other organization, just a small amount. But the materials that we have are so diverse. One of my favorite is Jean Elder's journals. he donated years ago these massive journals. He was an artist, an activist, involved with the San Antonio Country and the Bonham and the Happy Foundation archives, which unfortunately is temporarily closed since he passed away. But the journals are just fantastic. I've done a blog post on them, and there are pictures of him when he's donating them. They're just these massive tomes, and he put everything in there, just literally everything that he could think of. So it's like decades of the life of Gene Elder, and life as seen through his very gay, creative eyes.
Yeah, yeah. No, I just saw too that you were interviewed for a piece on KSAT about the history of the Bonham. And so if I'll see if I can find that link, but it's a really good piece on the evolution of the Bonham and how it started at the SA Country. So if you're interested in watching that, I'll try to look for the link right now. But
yeah, that was really, I was happy when they contacted communications to do that. And I forgot to ask Myra Arthur, who did the interview, how she had, found me. I guess it's not that hard to get a lot of PR, but it was fun. We did a live session. I had not done live TV before, so that was an interesting learning curve, and they were just super and walked me through it. And then we did a taped piece that they showed on KSAT Explains. So it was very well received.
I just found the link and shared it on there. So take a look. It's a really cool piece.
There's also an article in this month's Pride issue of San Antonio Magazine. It's an article by Jade Esteban Estrada, who's a performance artist and someone I've known for many years, interviewed me and some other people. It's a very well done article.
Yeah, yeah. So again, I just want to encourage everybody, if you haven't gone to our digital collections, to go through and look at all of the wonderful special collections, the LGBTQ collections here at the UTSA Library. It's really cool and interesting stuff. And Melissa, when do you guys anticipate being able to, I think in the fall we'll probably be open again, but we'll hopefully soon be able to share more of the collection for those who might want to come in person.
Yeah, it's we're definitely planning on reopening in the fall. We haven't had a lot of we've been doing a lot of proxy research, let's put it that way, for folks, since we get requests from all over the country, and since people can't access the physical materials, we've been doing our best. Especially Moira has really been busy doing reproductions for folks, but we do a lot of proxy research, get the information to people. Yeah, you can't come in physically, but we do our best to make sure they get the materials they need. And of course, it's very helpful when we have collections online, but that is such a small percentage of the materials that we have.
So we'll be excited when we can all come back and go.
I can't wait. I go into the archives several days a week, and it's just so nice being back and being able to physically interact with the materials. And having not been there for, it was almost a year, there's a backlog that needs to get worked through so that those materials are made available. So we're working on it, but I think we're all ready to get back to life on campus with students too. That'll be really nice.
Sure. Well, it looks like we're coming up to the end of our time. Amy, do you want to close us off? Amy has shared a whole bunch of resources in the chat, so please take a look at those. And Amy, what will this recording be shared? How is that going to work?
Yeah, I will share a link to the recording to everybody who is registered. So if like anyone couldn't make it, we will have a recording posted soon. And also, I just had I guess one last question for you, Melissa, before we go. If students wanted to get involved working with the archives or like doing research using our collections, can they reach out to you, or how
Mhm.
should they go about doing it?
They can contact me directly, or they can email our department email, UTSA Special Collections. Is it UTSA? I think that's all one. I have to think about it now. But all that info is on our website as well. But yes, I'm happy to take questions directly.
Right, awesome. So I linked over to your page in the staff directory. And if anyone has any last minute questions, feel free to ask. And if not, then thank you for coming to our talk today. And thank you, Melissa, for joining us for this fabulous presentation. And thanks, Joaquin, for helping with moderating. And everybody have a good rest of your day and have a, I guess, good summer vacation, even though some of us aren't really on vacation, but just have a good summer.
Happy Pride to everyone.
Yes, happy Pride.
Absolutely. Happy Pride. Thanks, y'all. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.